The original Devil May Cry is a classic, and to this day is the only game in the series to crack a 90 on Metacritic. And it's easy to understand why it's so widely regarded, as it created what we know today as a hack and slash genre, without which we don't get such classics like God of War, Ninja Gaiden, or even new spins on the genre like Hi-Fi Rush. Yet believe it or not, the original Devil May Cry came out over 20 years ago.
Man, that's really old.
And my memories of the game as a kid was an experience so difficult that I literally had to put the game down for a month before I could beat the final boss.
Kinda sucked at it.
And for the first time in over 20 years, I decided to play through the entirety of the original Devil May Cry in order to answer one question. Is it still good?
You serious?
And this video represents my thoughts on how this classic game feels to play now, both the good and the bad. So without further ado, let's get into it. Nowhere is this game's age more apparent than in the prologue. Even for the time, this was pretty bad. You had this absolutely illegible text that explains that 2,000 years ago, the legendary Dark Knight Sparta defeated the Demon King Mundus. All the while, some guy in a Sparta costume is in the background doing some karate. So yeah, it's not the best, but luckily things improve pretty quickly. Because right after this, we get introduced to our protagonist, Dante, who immediately proceeds to get beat up by this random woman who comes into his office.
That is not gangster. That's very not gangster.
The woman taunts Dante, saying his father never taught him how to use swords, and then proceeds to throw a motorcycle at him, leading to what I still think is one of the coolest character intros ever.
Time to go to work, guys.
If seeing this man pull his own sword out of his chest and levitate a motorcycle doesn't get you hyped, then I don't know what will. But I tell you what, 20 years later, this still works for me. The woman tells us her name is Trish and that this all was just a test to see if Dante was strong enough to take on the Demon King Mundus, who has been resurrected on the remote Malay island. Dante, who is the son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta, is eager to kill Mundus because after his father died, Mundus killed Dante's mother and brother, which means that he's obviously going to Malay Island so we can finally get to Devil May Cry's iconic action gameplay.
It's dry, it's ugly, it's boring.
Okay, mission 1 actually starts off kinda slow, but that's because the game is allowing you to get used to its controls, which at the time were pretty new. And even with that said, it isn't long before we finally get a taste of combat, as Dante gets confronted by demonic marionettes while exploring the castle. And I have to admit that Devil May Cry 1's combat still feels good, even if it does feel simple in comparison to other entries. You can mash out a 3-hit combo, but if you pause between button presses, you get access to better and longer combo strings. This adds a layer of technical skill to the game's combat system while preventing it from being a mindless brawler. Not to mention, enemies can also parry your attacks, encouraging you to think carefully about how you engage them. Yet I also think the simplicity of Devil May Cry 1's combat is its greatest virtue. Devil May Cry 5 Dante, for example, feels more like an entire fighting game system than a character. I mean, just look at the inputs of an advanced Dante player.
And how are you doing that?
Essentially, from Devil May Cry 3 onwards, Dante can feel overwhelming to new players. DMC1 Dante, on the other hand, just asks you to focus on the fundamentals that carry across all games in the series, making me think that DMC1 is still a great place to start for new players. Now Mission 2 kicks off with another iconic moment. Dante gets impaled by a sword possessed by a lightning demon, and literally brushes off the attack as if it were nothing, claiming the sword as his own. And if seeing this doesn't make you fall in love with this character, then Devil May Cry simply might not be for you.
I think you should leave.
Anyway, the sword is a laster and it finally gives us access to Dante's signature move, Stinger. More importantly, however, it allows us to use Devil Trigger. And it's possibly because Devil May Cry 1 doesn't let you choose hard on your first playthrough, but Devil Trigger is ridiculously strong in this game. We also get access to the shotgun, which is really fun to use as a combo ender. And with 3 new tools at your disposal, combat starts to feel pretty easy. Yet when these new enemies called Sin Scissors are introduced, you also have to face one of Devil May Cry 1's biggest challenges, that being the game's camera, which is always fixed but typically does a good job of framing the action, but in tight spaces or those with a lot of verticality typically leaves you unable to see your enemy. 90% of the time it's not an issue, but when it sucks, it sucks. Anyway, we're moving on to mission 3 where we get our first boss fight. And you can tell there's going to be a boss fight because in Devil May Cry 1 there always is when you see a cool environment or cool music. And this mission has both. So the first boss is a spider demon named Phantom. And through their interactions we get to see just how nonplussed Dante is.
I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
Now this is a very engaging opening boss fight, as Phantom is highly resistant to physical and range attacks and has no obvious weaknesses. Yet the game does give you clues, as Phantom tries to hide his face when you shoot at him.
Well, that's obvious.
And if you stinger his face before he launches a fireball, you'll cause massive damage and look cool while doing it. And again, Devil Trigger feels very strong in this game, as it can also be used defensively to keep yourself from being staggered when hit by Phantom's fireball. And beyond that, it can simply be used to melt Phantom's health. Mission 4 starts off with Phantom chasing us down a hallway. But as you should know by now, as long as you pop your Devil Trigger, there's nothing you need to fear. You can actually restart the mission to kill him over and over again for red orbs, which allow you to upgrade Dante, but since I don't have the patience to grind like 20 years ago, I move on. I also do one of 2 secret missions I find throughout my entire playthrough during this mission, allowing me to upgrade Dante's health ever so slightly. In any case, Mission 4 introduces us to another iconic enemy, Shadow, who in addition to a really cool design has one of Devil May Cry's coolest battle themes. Now Shadow is cool because before you can hurt him with your sword, you have to get his health down with your guns. It's smart game design that makes guns feel more integral to the combat systems than ladder entries where they just feel like combo extenders. And when you damage his core enough, he just kind of explodes.
That was weird. That was a weird thing to do.
One thing I haven't mentioned up to this point is level design, which is linear and essentially has Dante running around collecting MacGuffins to move from one puzzle to the next. The levels just stitch together the combat scenarios, and Mission 4 has one of the best fights in the game. Dante gets confronted by this demon knight who challenges him to an honorable duel. And if you couldn't tell from his character design, this is clearly a boss. And not just any boss, the best boss in the game. This is Nelo Angelo, the first rival in Devil May Cry. He's got a big sword that can shoot fireballs and teleport, making him a formidable challenge. He's slow, but he can and will rock you, and all it takes is the tip of his sword to take your health down to half. I also had to contend with the camera at one point because she was shooting fireballs off screen, but I at least had clear audio cues. Overall, the fight is pretty simple, just get behind him and go to town with your Devil Trigger. At one point though, I did actually miss my attack and ended up falling all the way down to the bottom of the level, meaning I had to run all the way back to Nelo Angelo while dodging fireballs I couldn't see. In any case, it's one of the few fights in the entire series that Dante canonically loses, but Nelo Angelo just kinda wigs out when he sees Dante's amulet.
Can someone please explain to me what's going on here?
The game does a really poor job telling its story, but if you read Dante's amulet description, you'll probably understand what's going on. So the next few missions are pretty much more of the same, so I'll move quickly through some highlights, including getting wrecked by this Shadow. We also get introduced to these flying bug enemies in Mission 6 that are extremely weak to guns. And can we just appreciate how slick Dante's moving and shooting animations are? Mission 7 has another Phantom mini boss fight. And Mission 8 has a really cool environment, so you know what that means. That's right, it's a boss fight, and guess what? It's Phantom again.
No, please.
Not again.
A major weakness of Devil May Cry 1 is that it recycles bosses, and if you count the optional hallway fights, we've already fought Phantom like 4 times. This fight is largely the same as what came before, but Phantom is a lot more aggressive and can summon fireballs from the sky. He can also body slam you into the next century if he manages to get his hands on you. There's also a secret way to end this boss fight early by making Phantom jump on the stained glass a set number of times. However, trying to do this got me killed, so I guess you'll just have to look that up on YouTube. Regardless of how you kill him, Phantom ends up falling through the stained glass and getting impaled on the statue below. And as he dies, Phantom opines that Dante might be stronger than his father Sparta, which is a funny line if you killed him by making him jump through the glass. Also, Trish shows up for a second, and if you've been wondering where she was, she literally disappears before Mission 1 even starts. Now after we kill Phantom, you can get the grenade launcher, which is ridiculously overpowered for its ability to stagger enemies and charge your Devil Trigger.
Well, that doesn't seem fair.
Mission 9 introduces us to these lizard-like demons called Assaults. These guys are tough, but are trivialized by the grenade launcher. Dante gets a new weapon in this level, but he has to go through an awful platforming section to get it. I don't know why they put so much platforming in this game, but it's really bad. At the very least, I have the air hike move for Alaster, which allows me to double jump. Once you do reach the required platform, Dante gains Ifrit, Hell Gauntlets that charges punches and kicks. Ifrit has a fun moveset, and any attack in a combo string can be charged. It's an easy weapon to feel cool and balances out Alaster nicely. You can also switch between the two weapons at the press of a button, but it's pretty slow, so I don't recommend it. I forgot to mention that Mission 9 takes place in a Coliseum, which is a pretty cool environment, so... This is Griffin, some kind of demon bird that gets immediately dismissed by Dante.
Block off, Featherface!
He is definitely the most dynamic boss fight up to this point, as he will be able to challenge players both from range and up close. The only time he's vulnerable is when he exposes his core. It's the hit the weak point design that's been consistent in every boss up to this point, but I don't find it lazy or annoying because every boss has had their own unique strengths and weaknesses. So the next few missions have some of the worst combat encounters and level design in the game, so I'm going to try and move through these quickly. Mission 11 has some of the worst fights with the camera I experienced throughout my entire playthrough. It also has this tiny cramped hole that the developers just decided to stuff a bunch of assaults in. Also, more platforming. And at this point, I'm pretty tired of running around collecting MacGuffins. It's clearly Resident Evil design, which Devil May Cry is derived from, but without all the lore and cutscenes. It's not even clear how Dante knows what to do from one mission to the next. At the very least, we do get another fight with Nelo Angelo again, and this time he almost kills me. Luckily, I'm able to find a health pickup and employ the same strategy from the last fight. Get behind them, activate double trigger, finish the fight. But since this is Devil May Cry 1, we know we're going to see him again. Now we get to probably the worst couple of missions in the game, where the developers for some reason decided we needed a ghost ship and underwater levels. What's bad about these levels is that the underwater sections don't allow you to attack or use your devil trigger, though I guess it's cool that canonically Dante can breathe underwater. The saving grace is that these sections are short, and once you get the needle gun you can fight back. However, don't expect it to be any fun.
This was a terrible idea.
Once we get to the deck of the ghost ship, it starts moving and we get another boss fight. And guess who? It's Griffin. And this is clearly the worst boss fight in the entire game. Most of the time Griffin is completely out of range, while instead you're attacked by this phantasmal eagle. Sometimes it helps you jump really high, other times it just hurts you. Adds to that very vertical and narrow arena, and you have a lot of reasons to want to finish this fight early. And in testament to how powerful ranged weapons are in this game, I'm actually able to finish Griffin off with ebony and ivory. This allows us to enter the cabin to grab another MacGuffin, which in turn sinks the ship. This turns most of the mission into an underwater level. It is blessedly short, however, and we get some nice flavor text that shows how little Dante cares about money. We start backtracking to the Coliseum and actually have to do some puzzles that are aided by Devil Trigger, particularly Elasters, which gives you super speed. And it kind of makes me wish the series gave Devil Trigger more utility outside of combat, because it's refreshing using it for more than just bashing a demon's skull in. We also come across more aggressive version of assaults, but by this point we know how to handle them. And if I haven't mentioned already, this game has some really great looking environments and still looks good today. Once we reach the Coliseum area again, we're greeted by these rock spiders who look like mini phantoms. Except for these, I could never find their weak points and always struggle to kill them. Anyway, once we enter the arena, we're set for our final fight with Griffin. The fight starts with Griffin in the air again, but once you do enough damage, you'll bring him to the ground permanently. And it's here where he's at his most dangerous, using his most intricate electrical attacks yet. Yet his weaknesses remain the same, so the strategy to kill him does too. Wait for him to expose his core, activate Devil Trigger, and finish the fight. Once Griffin is defeated, he proclaims that Dante is stronger than his father Sparta, but I think this idea consistently gets undercut by the rest of the game. And I'll explain more later. For now, we just need to know that Munda shows up and kills Griffin for failing to kill Dante. Trish again shows up randomly, and we get this weird scene where Dante tells her information she already knows, that Mildus killed his family. But for some reason, she acts like this is new information, as if she didn't say this when they first met.
You're the man who lost a mother and a brother to evil 20 years ago.
It doesn't matter because she disappears again anyway. And it makes me really hope to get a remake from Capcom because the story is told so poorly here but has a lot of potential. I'd also love to see Ruben Langdon voice Dante so we have a consistent performance throughout the series. In any case, with Griffin dead, we now enter the official endgame of Devil May Cry 1. We have to make our way back to the castle and the entire mood is changed. For one thing, the statue that was at the entrance at the beginning of the game is no longer there. We also get introduced to this new doppelganger enemy that's pretty cool in design. It can take the form of a battered Dante, and when in Dante's form it can copy some of his moves. It also has the ability to give you nightmares with its horrendous laser eye. In practice, fighting it is a little disappointing, as with so many enemies, it's pretty weak to the grenade launcher. We head back to the cathedral where we fought Phantom, and there's this weird puddle from which emerges this monstrosity of a boss.
What is that monstrosity?
This is Nightmare, one of the hardest bosses in the game, who's only vulnerable when you can expose his core through hitting these switches. The issue is, even when his core is exposed, Nightmare is never really vulnerable. He always has a way of attacking you and staying on the offensive. Even with Devil Trigger active, he manages to get me into red health before I finish him off. And I use the term finish off loosely here because, as you should know by now, we'll probably be seeing Nightmare again. The next mission introduces us to Frost, who are like assaults but can't be cheesed with a grenade launcher. These guys are very strong, able to regenerate, do AoE attacks, and shoot projectiles. As you likely assume, these guys are better handled with Ifrit, but since I haven't spent any time upgrading the weapon, I just use Devil Trigger and hope for the best. Even with that, they managed to get me to half health before I finally finish them off. Waiting for us at the end of the mission is Nelo Angelo, who's ready for one last showdown. But before the fight begins, we finally get a face reveal.
Y'all have no idea who you are.
This has to be one of the most baffling story decisions of DMC1. We're treated to this very dramatic face reveal, but we have no idea who this person is, and Dante gives no indication that he recognizes him. Looking at it now with the benefit of the succeeding entries, Nelo Angelo probably has the same character model as Dante, but with the hair swept back. It's just something that's not readily apparent given the pale skin and red eyes. In any case, this boss fight is amazing, and feels appropriately epic for a rival character. He now has the ability to use summoned swords both offensively and defensively. He can also just straight up fly now and can still kill you in a few hits if you're not careful. This is the perfect encapsulation of what a rival fight should be, and for me came down to the very wire. Once we defeat him, he does the ambiguous explosion thing again and drops the other half of Dante's amulet. We were fighting Dante's twin brother Virgil this whole time, who Dante thought had been killed by Mundus, but instead had been serving as a slave. But because no weight has been given to this plot thread, it just kind of feels like...
Okay, whatever, is that it?
In any case, Mundus, who turned out to be that statue from the entrance, confirmed that that was indeed Virgil, and also that Trish is his servant as well, if it wasn't already obvious from her repeated disappearing acts. With both halves of his mother's amulet and his father's sword, Dante is able to create the Devil Sword Sparta, by far the strongest weapon in the game with the Lacer's basic moveset. The issue is it has no Devil Trigger, meaning you can't regenerate your health, and no Air Hike, meaning you can't double jump, making it a high risk, high reward kind of weapon. This is proven true as we have to face Nightmare again. As long as you're able to reach his core, you're able to melt his health bar with the Devil Sword Sparta. But with his constant attacks, you're likely going to miss Devil Trigger for its aid to your durability. Anyway, with Nightmare defeated, we're able to make our way to the bowels of Hell. And odd as it is to say, Hell has some of the best level design in the game. It's an organic, fleshy design that makes it feel like you're inside the belly of a beast. And it's here where we enter an arena that signals our final fight with Nightmare. This time he has the ability to trap you and seal you within a pocket dimension where you have to fight a previous boss in order to escape. I had to fight Nelo Angelo again and barely made it out alive. I had to switch back to a Lacer to take advantage of Devil Trigger's health regen just to stay in the fight. Luckily you do get health and he does take damage when you escape the mirror dimension, so even with having nearly died, I'm able to get him down to his last legs. Then Trish commits her heel turn and attacks me before I can land a finishing blow, which is extremely frustrating because I have to reactivate the switch and I get killed before I can reach his exposed core. It's all good because I managed to get him down on my second attempt, but he randomly gets a second wind and regains some health right before he's about to die. Luckily I was still able to kill him, but it was a very near thing. While in his death throes, Nightmare knocks over a pillar that's about to crush Trish. Yet despite betraying him, Dante still decides to save her. And when she asks why, Dante explains that she looks like his mother. And as Trish tries to approach him, I think we get the best scene in the entire game.
Dante!
Don't come any closer, you devil! You may look like my mother, but you're nowhere close to her. You have no soul. You have the face, but you'll never have her fire!
After enacting that fatality on Trish, we proceed through Hell to try to get through the entrance to Mundus' lair, which involves fighting these nightmare-fueled monsters called Nobodies and of course platforming. It's a bit of a gauntlet, but at this point nothing we haven't seen before. With the entrance unsealed, we can finally confront the final boss. Mundus' lair is the epitome of the cool environment and music before a boss fight rule. Dante approaches Mundus, who reveals that he has Trish and threatens him not to move. He then proceeds to just kind of body Dante, who supposedly is more powerful than his father Sparta. In any case, Trish, who is not at all restrained, steps in to save Dante, setting up my favorite scene in the entire franchise.
Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
2 decades later, the intro to this fight is still hype. Mundus takes Dante into space, Dante transforms into Sparta, and we are about to have the showdown of a lifetime. Until it's revealed that this is some on-the-rails space harrier fight. I don't know what convinced the developers to turn their final epic boss battle into a bullet hell minigame, but I hate it.
Why would you do this to me?
This section is terrible, and is the reason I had to put the game down for a month before finally beating it as a kid. It is wholly unrelated to anything that came before and tests none of the skills you've built up playing this game, which goes against the fundamental tenets of boss design. I cannot understate how much I hate this fight, and 2 decades later is still the worst part of this game for me. But your own personal mileage may vary, especially if you're good at bullet hell shoot 'em ups. I'm not and break a fundamental tenet of good Devil May Cry gameplay by using an item to increase my DT gauge and end the fight early. What's worse is that this isn't even the real boss fight, that's the second phase. But if you're like me and you sucked at the previous section, your health doesn't regenerate when Mundus gets a full bar. So I break the no item tenet again using a yellow orb to replay this section with full health.
I don't regret it, you know.
This should have been what the boss fight was to begin with. You can now use Devil Trigger with the Devil Sword Sparta, and it is absurdly powerful. The only downside to this fight is that you still have to platform in order to hit Mundus. But frankly, this fight is pretty easy, and just so I don't have to platform again, I decide to end it from range. After defeating Mundus, Dante cries over Trish's lifeless body, and we get this gem of a line.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
How no one decided they should re-record that line will forever baffle me, but honestly I'm glad they didn't. And I get that Trish looks like Dante's mom, but I swear the writing wants you to think there's a romantic relationship between the two. I mean, he barely knows this woman and he gives her his 2 most precious family heirlooms. Anyway, hell is literally about to explode for some reason and we have to escape the island. What follows is a race through the castle that ultimately ends up with Dante being trapped in the sewers. And Mundus shows up again, but since Dante decided to give his most powerful weapons to a stranger, he can't take him on. Luckily, Trish shows up out of nowhere and gives Dante the platonic energy he needs to finish Mundus off once and for all.
Jackpot!
We get more completely platonic friend energy from Dante and Trish, and they get in a plane and escape the island. The game ends with Dante and Trish going into business together and Dante renaming his shop to Devils Never Cry. And the game ends with more goofy background animations. Look, this game has some warts. The story is poorly told in places, the final boss has some horrendous gimmicks, and the water levels and platforming are terrible. But I would be lying through my teeth if I said I didn't think this was still a great game. This game is a classic, and it is an amazing experience you deserve to have if you even remotely like action games. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, it means a lot. Let me know your own thoughts below on Devil May Cry 1, and let me know if you'd like to see more content like this. This has been Harlan Gaming, signing off.